On a warm summer night in July 2016, 17-year-old Emelie Meng said goodbye to her friends at a Danish train station and began walking home alone. She never arrived. What followed was one of Denmark's most haunting criminal investigations, a case that would grip the nation for nearly 8 years, expose serious flaws in police work, and ultimately be solved not through traditional detective methods, but through a second terrifying crime that finally brought a predator to justice. This is the true story of Emelie Meng, a bright young woman whose life was stolen from her in the early hours of a summer morning, and the long, painful journey toward justice that her family and an entire country endured. Emilie Meng was born on July 31, 1998, in the small coastal town of Korsør, Denmark. Located on the island of Zealand, Korsør is the kind of quiet, safe community where neighbors know one another and violent crime is virtually unheard of. Emelie grew up in this peaceful environment with her mother, Emelie Meng, in what should have been a secure and nurturing childhood. Those who knew Emelie described her as a sweet and thoughtful young woman with a generous spirit. Her best friend, Emilie, whom she had known since childhood, remembered Emelie as someone who always put others first, someone who was accommodating and kind to everyone she met. Their friendship was built on deep, introspective conversations about life, death, and personal aspirations. Emelie had a reflective, empathetic nature that drew people to her. At 17, Emelie had just completed her first year in the higher preparatory examination program at Slagelse Gymnasium, a secondary school about 20 kilometers from her home. She was a dedicated student preparing to begin her second year after the summer holidays. Like many teenagers, she balanced her studies with a rich social life, spending time with her tight-knit circle of friends, and participating in activities she loved. One of Emelie's passions was singing. She was an active member of the church choir at St. Povls Kirke in Korsør, attending services and choir practice every Sunday morning without fail. Her commitment to the choir was such that her family and friends could set their clocks by it. Emelie never missed a Sunday service. She had a beautiful voice and found joy in making music with her church community. In the summer of 2016, Emelie had her whole life ahead of her. She was at that precious age between adolescence and adulthood, full of dreams and possibilities. She had plans for her education, aspirations for her future, and a loving family and circle of friends who cherished her. Nothing about her life suggested tragedy was waiting around the corner. On the evening of Saturday, July 9, 2016, Emelie made plans to go out with friends in the nearby town of Slagelse. It was a typical summer weekend outing for a group of teenagers. Emelie would be joining 2 female friends and 1 male friend for a night of socializing. She informed her mother of her plans, assuring her that she would be home in time for church choir the next morning. It was the kind of promise Emelie always kept. The group traveled by train from Korsør to Slagelse, planning to return the same way later that night. In Slagelse, they spent the evening at a local hookah lounge, chatting and relaxing in the pleasant summer atmosphere. The male friend later described the evening as very enjoyable, with light-hearted conversations typical of friends spending a summer night together. There was nothing unusual about the evening. No arguments, no drama, no warning signs that anything was amiss. As the night progressed into the early morning hours of Sunday, July 10th, the group prepared to head home. They caught a train back to Korsør, arriving at Korsør Station around 4 o'clock in the morning. The station was quiet at that hour, as most small-town train stations are in the pre-dawn darkness. When the group disembarked at Korsør Station, they faced a decision about how to get home. Emelie's friends decided to share a taxi, but Emelie made a different choice. Her home was approximately 4 kilometers from the station. It was a walk she had made before, through streets she knew well. The summer night was warm. Perhaps she wanted to save money on the taxi fare. Perhaps she wanted some quiet time alone after a social evening. Perhaps she simply enjoyed walking. Whatever her reasoning, Emelie told her friends she would walk home. Her friends said their goodbyes and left in the taxi. Emelie was last seen at the station around 4 a.m., beginning her walk home alone. Surveillance cameras at Korsør Station captured footage of Emelie's arrival with her friends and confirmed her presence in the area shortly after 4 o'clock. This grainy video evidence would later become crucial to the investigation. At approximately 4:07 a.m., the cameras picked up something else. A light-colored passenger car, driving around the station car park. The quality of the footage was poor, making it difficult to identify the exact make and model of the vehicle, but it was there, circling the area at the very time Emelie was walking alone. Emelie never made it home. Sometime between leaving Korsør Station at 4 a.m. and the sunrise a few hours later, 17-year-old Emelie Meng vanished. Sunday morning, July 10th, arrived with its usual summer brightness. At 9:30 a.m., the church choir at St. Povel's Kirk gathered for practice before the service. Emelie was not there. This was unprecedented. Emelie never missed choir. Her absence immediately raised alarm bells among her family and friends. They tried calling her mobile phone repeatedly. No answer. They contacted her friends from the night before, hoping perhaps she had stayed at someone's house. She had not. By later that day, with no word from Emelie, and no explanation for her absence, her family contacted the police to report her missing. The authorities began their investigation immediately, but their initial response would later become a source of intense controversy. Police began canvassing the area, speaking with Emelie's friends about the night out, reviewing her last known movements. They learned that she had left the station on foot around 4 a.m., intending to walk home. Her phone was either off or the battery had died. It was providing no signal to track. In the days following Emelie's disappearance, the people of Korsør mobilized. Volunteers joined police in searching fields, forests, and coastal areas around the small town. Missing person posters with Emelie's photograph began appearing throughout the region, then across Denmark. Her case gained national media attention. A young girl had simply vanished from a safe town in a safe country, and no one could explain how or why. Emelie Meng, Emelie's mother, made emotional public appeals for information, for her daughter's safe return, for any clue that might explain what had happened. The family lived in a state of suspended anguish, not knowing if Emelie was alive or dead, suffering or beyond suffering. The investigation expanded. Police interviewed approximately 650 people in the initial phases. They analyzed over 400,000 vehicle registrations, cross-referencing them with telecommunications data and potential surveillance footage. Hay followed hundreds of tips from the public, some well-meaning, some wildly speculative. Several people became suspects at various points. A 33-year-old truck driver was investigated. A 67-year-old man had his house searched 5 times by police. Each time, these individuals were eventually cleared. GPS data from the truck driver's vehicle showed he was not in the area. No evidence connected the older man to the disappearance, despite the intense scrutiny. The police developed 3 working theories. Perhaps Emelie had run away voluntarily. Perhaps she had been involved in an accident. Or perhaps she was the victim of a crime. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the likelihood of the first 2 theories diminished. If Emelie had run away, surely there would have been some contact, some sighting, some trace. If she had been in an accident, her body would have been found in the local search areas. The third theory, the darkest one, seemed increasingly likely. For 168 days, Emelie Meng was missing. Her family lived in agony. The investigation continued but had no clear leads. Then, on December 24, 2016, Christmas Eve, a hunter walking near Regnemarks Lake, approximately 70 kilometers from Korsør, made a horrifying discovery in a wooded area. He found a human body, partially concealed in the forest undergrowth. Police were immediately called to the scene. The body was badly decomposed, making immediate identification difficult. However, the location was in a remote, forested area not far from residential neighborhoods, accessible by roads and paths. Forensic investigators carefully documented the scene, and the body was transported for autopsy and identification. On December 27, 2016, 3 days after the body's discovery, and 5.5 months after Emelie disappeared, police confirmed what her family had feared most. The body found near Regnemarks Lake was Emelie Meng. She had been strangled to death. The autopsy revealed the cause of death was strangulation. The state of decomposition made it impossible to determine many other details about what had happened to Emelie in her final hours. There were no definitive signs of sexual assault that could be confirmed, though the condition of the body made such determinations difficult. The medical examiner could not establish exactly when Emilie had died, though it was believed to have occurred shortly after her disappearance in July. The discovery transformed the missing person case into a murder investigation. Police began an intensive forensic examination of the scene where Emilie's body was found. They collected DNA evidence from her remains and from the surrounding area. However, the evidence was severely degraded. 5 months of exposure to summer heat, rain, and natural decomposition had taken a heavy toll on any biological material that might have been present. The DNA evidence that was recovered was fragmented and partial. Using the technology available in 2016 and 2017, forensic scientists could determine that male DNA was present, indicating that Emilie had likely been in contact with a male individual around the time of her death. However, the DNA was too degraded to create a complete profile that could be matched against individuals in the police database. This was a devastating blow to the investigation. DNA evidence is often the key to solving violent crimes, but only if the DNA can be properly analyzed and matched. In Emilie's case, they had evidence, but not evidence they could use effectively with the tools they had at the time. Police began the monumental task of trying to identify Emilie's killer through more traditional methods. They conducted a mass DNA screening in the Korsør area, testing approximately 1,450 men who lived in or had connections to the region. Every man who agreed to be tested had a DNA sample taken. Each sample was analyzed and compared against the partial DNA profile from Emilie's case. None matched. The killer was not among the men tested, or the DNA was too degraded to produce a match even if he was. The investigation also focused on the light-colored car seen on surveillance footage at Korsør Station around the time of Emilie's disappearance. Police analyzed over 400,000 vehicle registrations, trying to identify cars that matched the description and whose owners might have been in the area that night. Despite this massive effort, no definitive lead emerged. Theories about what had happened to Emilie began to take shape. The location where her body was found, near Regnemarks Lake, was approximately 70 kilometers from where she was last seen. This suggested she had been transported there, either while still alive or after she had been killed. The wooded area where she was concealed was accessible by road, but remote enough that the body had gone undiscovered for months. Investigators believed that Emilie had been abducted from somewhere along her walk home from the train station. Someone in a vehicle had approached her, either offering a ride or forcing her into the car. She had been taken to an unknown location where she was killed, and her body was then transported to the forest near Regnemarks Lake and left there. But who? And why? These questions remained unanswered. As 2017 progressed, the Emelie Meng case began to grow cold. Police continued to follow leads as they came in, but the trail had gone cold. The killer, whoever he was, had left few traces and had successfully evaded one of the largest criminal investigations in recent Danish history. The case remained in the public consciousness. Emilie's family continued to appeal for information. Anniversary memorials marked the passage of time since her disappearance and death. But as years passed without any breakthrough, it seemed possible that Emilie's murder might never be solved. Then, on March 23, 2022, nearly 6 years after Emilie's murder, something happened that would eventually crack the case wide open, though it would take another year before the connection became clear. A 15-year-old girl was walking home in the town of Korsør, approximately 30 kilometers from where Emilie had last been seen. It was evening, and she was alone. A man approached her and attempted to abduct her, trying to force her into his vehicle. The girl fought back. She screamed, she resisted, and she managed to escape. She ran to safety and immediately reported the attack to police. The attempted abduction was investigated, but the perpetrator was not immediately identified. The girl provided a description of her attacker and the vehicle, but, without more concrete evidence, the case initially went nowhere. However, police took DNA samples from the scene and from the girl, and these were preserved in their database. 1 year later, on March 23, 2023, exactly 1 year after the attempted abduction in Korsør, A 13-year-old girl was walking in the small village of Køge, approximately 40 kilometers from Korsør. A man in a car approached her. He forced her into his vehicle at knife point and drove her to a remote location in a wooded area. There he raped her. However, the girl was not abandoned or killed. For reasons that remain unclear, the perpetrator let her go. She was able to contact authorities and was found by police. She was traumatized but alive. This time, police responded with overwhelming force and urgency. They immediately launched a major investigation. They knew they were looking for a dangerous predator who had just committed a horrific crime and who might strike again. The parallels to the Emelie Meng case were not lost on investigators. Another young girl, another abduction, another wooded area. Police collected DNA evidence from the 13-year-old victim and from the crime scene. They also had DNA from the attempted abduction of the 15-year-old girl in Sorrow exactly 1 year earlier. When they compared these DNA samples, they found a match. The same man had attacked both girls. Now police had a priority. They had DNA from 2 recent crimes, DNA that was fresh and uncompromised by time and decomposition. They began systematically comparing this DNA profile against their databases, against anyone who might have been involved in similar crimes or who had been tested in previous investigations. And they found a match. The DNA from the attacks on the 15-year-old and the 13-year-old matched DNA that had been collected years earlier, in 2016, during the mass DNA screening in the Korsør area following Emelie Meng's disappearance. The man who had attacked those 2 girls had been tested back then, and his DNA had been in the police database all along. But why had he not been identified as Emelie's killer in 2016 or 2017? The answer lay in the degraded state of the DNA evidence from Emelie's case and the limitations of DNA analysis technology at that time. The DNA from Emelie's body and the crime scene had been too fragmented and partial to create a usable profile for comparison. Even though the killer's DNA was in the database, the technology available then could not make the connection. However, by 2023, DNA analysis technology had advanced significantly. New techniques allowed forensic scientists to analyze smaller, more degraded DNA samples and create profiles from genetic material that would have been unusable years earlier. When investigators took the DNA profile from the recent attacks and used advanced analysis techniques to compare it with the DNA evidence from Emelie's case, they found a match. 7 years after Emelie Meng's murder, police finally knew who had killed her. On March 28, 2023, 5 days after the attack, the 13-year-old girl, police arrested Philip Patrick West, a 30-year-old man from the Korsør area. He was charged with kidnapping and rape of the 13-year-old girl and with the attempted kidnapping of the 15-year-old girl the previous year. At first, these were the only charges. Police had him in custody for the recent crimes, but they needed to build the case connecting him to Emelie Meng. They conducted a new DNA analysis of the evidence from Emelie's body, using the most advanced forensic techniques available. The results were definitive. The DNA found on Emelie matched Philip West's DNA profile. On May 17, 2023, 2 months after his initial arrest, Philip West was formally charged with the murder of Emelie Meng. After nearly 7 years, Emelie's family finally had answers about who had killed their daughter. So who was Philip Patrick West? To those who knew him casually, he seemed unremarkable. He was 30 years old at the time of his arrest. He had worked as an electrician. He lived in the Korsør area, not far from where Emelie had lived. He had a girlfriend and a child. He appeared, on the surface, to be an ordinary person living an ordinary life. But beneath that surface was a predator who had successfully hidden his true nature for years. At the time of Emelie's murder, West had been 23 years old. He had no prior convictions for violent crimes, nothing that would have put him on police radar as a dangerous individual. This may explain why, even though he was among the 1,450 men DNA tested in 2016, he was not initially suspected. West participated in the mass DNA screening voluntarily, as did most of the men who were asked. At the time, he must have believed that the DNA from Emelie's body was too degraded to ever be matched to him. He was almost right. Had he committed his crime just a few years later, or had new DNA technology not emerged, or had he not attacked 2 more girls years later and provided fresh DNA samples, he might never have been UGHT. The fact that West went on to attack 2 more young girls suggests that he was not merely a one-time killer overcome by circumstance or passion. The attempted abduction in 2022 and the successful kidnapping and rape in 2023 indicate a pattern of predatory behavior. He sought out young, vulnerable girls. He used a vehicle to approach them. He took them to remote, wooded areas. The attack on the 15-year-old girl in Sorrow occurred almost exactly 6 years after Emelie's murder. The attack on the 13-year-old girl happened exactly 7 years after Emelie's murder, and exactly 1 year after the Sorrow attack. Whether these timing coincidences were intentional on West's part or simply random is unknown. He has never explained his motivations or his actions in any detail. What is known is that if West had been identified in 2016 as Emelie's killer, the 15-year-old girl in Sorrow would never have been attacked. The 13-year-old girl in Køge would never have endured the trauma of kidnapping and rape. 2 young lives would have been spared terrible experiences. This knowledge haunts the case and raises painful questions about what might have been different if the technology had existed earlier, or if the investigation had proceeded differently. West's trial began in June 2024, more than a year after his arrest. The trial was held at the Roskilde District Court. The proceedings included testimony from DNA experts, police investigators, and the 2 surviving victims. The trial was complex, involving multiple charges spanning 7 years. The charges against West were severe. For Emelie Meng's case, he was charged with attempted rape, prolonged deprivation of liberty, and murder. The prosecution argued that West had abducted Emelie with the intention of raping her, that he had held her against her will, and that he had ultimately strangled her to death. For the 15-year-old girl in Sorrow, West was charged with attempted kidnapping. The girl's testimony about the attack and her successful escape was crucial to this charge. For the 13-year-old girl in Køge, West was charged with kidnapping and rape. This was the crime that had ultimately led to his identification and arrest, the crime where his fresh DNA had provided the key to solving Emelie's murder. Throughout the trial, the DNA evidence was central. Multiple experts testified about the matching DNA profiles, about how the degraded DNA from Emelie's case had finally been successfully analyzed using advanced techniques, and about the statistical page robability of the DNA matches. West's defense attorney attempted to argue that the DNA evidence from Emelie's case was not definitive, that the degradation and the partial nature of the profiles introduced uncertainty. However, the forensic evidence was strong enough that the prosecution maintained confidence in the case. Testimony from the survivors was also powerful. The 15-year-old girl, now 17, described her terrifying encounter and narrow escape. The 13-year-old girl, now 14, testified about the horror of her kidnapping and assault. Their testimonies not only supported the charges related to their own cases, but also painted a picture of West as a serial predator who targeted young girls. Police investigators testified about the long investigation into Emelie's murder, about the mass DNA screening, about the years of following dead-end leads, and about the breakthrough when the advanced DNA analysis finally connected West to the crime. On July 9, 2024, exactly 8 years to the day after Emelie Meng disappeared, the Roskilde District Court delivered its verdict. Philip Patrick West was found guilty. However, the verdict was complex. For Emelie Meng's case, West was convicted of murder, but he was found guilty only of attempted rape and attempted prolonged deprivation of liberty, rather than the completed crimes. The court determined that while West had clearly killed Emelie, the evidence did not definitively prove that he had completed a rape or that he had held her for an extended period before killing her. The decomposed state of her body and the lack of certain forensic evidence meant the court could not find him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt on those specific counts. For the attack on the 15-year-old girl, West was convicted of attempted kidnapping, consistent with the girl's testimony about fighting off her attacker. For the attack on the 13-year-old girl, West was convicted of kidnapping and rape. The sentence handed down by the court was severe. Philip Patrick West was sentenced to life imprisonment in Denmark. Under Danish law, a life sentence is among the most serious punishments available. While it is technically possible for life prisoners to apply for parole after serving 12 years, such applications are rarely granted for crimes of this magnitude. In practical terms, West would likely spend the rest of his life behind bars. The verdict and sentence brought mixed emotions for Emelie's family and for the families of the other victims. There was relief that justice had finally been served, that the man who had caused so much pain was being held accountable. There was satisfaction that Emelie's killer had been identified and would never be free again. But there was also the painful knowledge that no verdict, no sentence, could bring Emelie back or undo the trauma suffered by the two surviving victims. For the public, there was a sense of closure after 8 long years, but also profound sadness for what Emelie's family had lost forever. Immediately following the verdict, West's attorney announced that he would appeal the decision to the Eastern High Court. The Copenhagen Prosecution Office counter-appealed, seeking to have West convicted of the full charges, rather than just attempts in relation to Emelie's case. Prosecutors wanted him found guilty of rape and prolonged deprivation of liberty, not just attempts at these crimes. The appeal was scheduled to begin on October 28, 2025, in the Eastern High Court. Both sides prepared their arguments. It appeared the case would continue for months more, with another trial, more testimony, more media coverage. Then, on September 10, 2025, just over 14 months after his conviction, Philip West made a decision. Through his attorney, Karina Skau, he announced that he was withdrawing his appeal. He was accepting the district court's verdict and sentence. The Copenhagen Prosecution Office, in turn, dropped their counter-appeal. The case was closed. After 9 years, 2 months, and 1 day, the murder of Emelie Meng was finally, definitively resolved. Philip Patrick West would spend the rest of his life in prison. He is currently held in the high-security wing of Storstrøm Prison. The resolution of Emelie Meng's case brought not only justice, but also a reckoning with serious failures in the original investigation. Most significantly, Philip West had been DNA tested in 2016, shortly after Emelie's disappearance, as one of 1,450 men in the area. His DNA profile had been in the police database all along. However, the DNA evidence from Emelie's body and the scene was so degraded that the technology available in 2016 could not produce a usable match. This was not the fault of the investigators who collected and tested the DNA. They used the best methods available to them at the time. But it meant that West slipped through their net, despite their massive effort to test hundreds of men in the area. Had the advanced DNA analysis techniques available in 2023 existed in 2016, West might have been identified as Emelie's killer immediately. LD have been arrested before he could attack the 15-year-old girl in Sorrow in 2022. He would have been stopped before he kidnapped and raped the 13-year-old girl in Køge in 2023. Beyond the DNA issue, critics pointed to other problems with the investigation. Documentary programs and journalistic investigations suggested that private surveillance footage may have been overlooked or requested too late, after it had been deleted. Potential leads may have been followed slowly or inadequately. The case raised important questions about how police handle investigations of missing persons, especially young women. Emelie's case was initially treated as a possible runaway situation, with some suggestion that she might have been emotionally distressed over a recent relationship breakup. This may have led to valuable time being lost in the critical early hours and days of the investigation. The stark contrast between the handling of Emelie's disappearance in 2016 and the handling of the 13-year-old girl's kidnapping in 2023 was noted by many observers. When the 13-year-old vanished, police responded with immediate, overwhelming force. They assumed the worst from the start and acted with urgency. The same police chief who led the 2023 investigation was determined not to let another girl die, and that determination saved a life. The question that haunted many was, what if Emelie's case had been treated with that same urgency from the beginning? The Emelie Meng case profoundly affected Denmark, particularly the residents of Korsør and the surrounding communities. On the first anniversary of Emelie's disappearance in July 2017, approximately 40 local residents gathered at Korsør Station at 4:07 a.m., the time Emelie was last seen. They lit candles and observed a minute of silence. One 16-year-old participant said simply, "We miss the happy girl." The memorial reflected the community's ongoing grief and their determination to remember Emelie, not just as a victim, but as the joyful person she had been. The case shattered the sense of security in what had been perceived as a safe rural community. Young people in the area reported feeling less safe, particularly about walking alone. Parents became more protective. The murder of Emelie Meng became shorthand for the fear that terrible things can happen anywhere, to anyone, at any time. The case also sparked important discussions about violence against young women, about stranger danger, about how society protects its most vulnerable members. It led to calls for improvements in how missing person cases are investigated, particularly when the missing person is a young woman. The revelation that advanced DNA technology finally solved the case has prompted discussions about the need for continuous investment in forensic science, for keeping old evidence preserved even in circa-old cases, and for revisiting unsolved cases as new technologies become available. In the years since her death, efforts have been made to ensure that Emelie Meng is remembered as more than a murder victim. Her family and friends have shared memories of her warmth, her intelligence, her kindness, her beautiful singing voice. They have spoken about her thoughtful nature, her deep conversations with her best friend Sarah, her dedication to her studies and her church choir. Memorials and tributes to Emelie have appeared throughout the region. The community has worked to keep her memory alive, while also processing the trauma of what happened to her. For those who knew and loved Emelie, every milestone is a reminder of what was stolen. She never got to finish her education. She never got to pursue the career she might have chosen. She never experienced first love, travel, independence, marriage, motherhood, or any of the other experiences that might have filled her life. She was frozen in time at 17, forever the bright, kind young woman who sang in the church choir. Emelie Meng, Emelie's mother, has had to find a way to live with unimaginable loss. She has become an advocate for victims, families, and for improvements in missing person investigations. Through her pain, she has worked to help others who find themselves in similar nightmares. Throughout the legal proceedings, and even after his conviction, Philip West has never fully explained why he did what he did. He has not expressed remorse in any meaningful way. He has not provided answers to the many questions that remain. Why did he target Emelie that night? Was it purely random? Or had he noticed her before? What happened in those hours between when he encountered her and when he strangled her? Why did he choose that particular spot to hide her body? Why did he attack the 15-year-old girl in sorrow? What stopped him from completing that abduction? What was he planning to do with the 13-year-old girl if police had not found her? Would she have become another Emelie? West has provided no answers to these questions, and likely never will. He remains a cipher, a man who appeared normal on the surface, but harbored terrible darkness within.